Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 27th September 2023. My name is T.S.V. Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. Hardan, 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 Haribol, TRSV, Nectar, NECTAR, Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been discussing about the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been doing in all of my previous videos. Kindly subscribe to my vlog and press the bell icon so that I may keep reminding you of all of my future and previous videos. So let us continue with the topic for discussion for today's video. In the past few videos, we have been talking about a very important term in spiritualism called liberation. Liberation means permanent, permanent liberation of a human living entity from this endless cycle of births and deaths in this material world. In that process, yesterday's video delved on the topic of a recap of all that we have learned about this particular process. We know by now how a spirit spark gets ejected out of the spiritual hole, then, after floating endlessly in the space it once gets attracted towards the huge material world, tries to get attached to this huge material world, and in that process, this huge material world envelops this spirit spark turned spirit soul with four layers of material body, that is, first layer of causal intelligence and logic, second layer of astral mind, feelings and emotions, third layer of etheric senses being five in number, that is, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and the fourth gross body made up of four material elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth. This far we all know. As soon as this spirit soul gets enveloped and entrapped into these four layers of material body, it ceases to be just a spirit soul but gets a new identity as a living entity. Yesterday, when I was contemplating on this particular subject, interestingly, I came across a very important and intriguing example. We all know that male and female living human entities or any other living entity, be it a beast, a reptile, a bird, or an amphibian, resides in this material world. Invariably, the male counterpart mistakenly believes that it can lord it over the female counterpart. This reminded me of the nature of this spirit spark turned spirit hole, which mistakenly believes that it can lord it over this huge, extremely powerful material nature. In that process, just like this individual and minuscule, lonely spirit soul gets attached to this material world and gets entrapped into four layers of material body. Similarly, on an average, these male counterparts in the society invariably think in their complacence, false ego, and overconfidence that they can win over the female counterpart. In that process, they try to get in touch with these female counterparts who are not very impressed by such attention to them. But when it invariably happens, they entice this male counterpart in such a way that he gets entrapped into a life in which this female counterpart becomes the more powerful partner in a wedlock or in a marriage. Love it or leave it. All these machos who think that they are indispensable get attracted to the beauty, grace, finesse, and loveliness of the female counterpart and thus get entrapped into their powerful clutches and end up as mere slaves of these female counterparts. That is precisely the reason why some renunciants, monks, sannyasis, rishis, maharishis, etc., who are more attracted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and to whom they want to be eternal servants, shy away from getting materialistically attracted to the opposite sex. It is not because these guys are very confident. In fact, on the other hand, they are scared that these female counterparts may turn out to be too powerful for them to shy away from or to reject them. That is the reason why several spiritualists who meditate on God remain celibate as far as possible. Even those male counterparts who may be a part of the general household who gets married to the female counterparts take permission of those female counterparts to sit in one corner during their spare time and meditate on God. This is one example which crudely is similar to those spirit souls who are attracted to this material world. Anyway, we have learned by now through our past recap that the spirit soul gets attracted to the material world, becomes a living entity, lives here as far as it has to get adjusted to this material world and its complexities, and then begin its endless cycle of repeated birth and death in this material world. It is similar to a male counterpart getting entangled into the firm grip of the female counterpart and knowingly or unknowingly, advertently or inadvertently, deliberately or otherwise, by default or by design, is forced to raise a family of offsprings. This particular process goes on and on even in this material world till that particular male counterpart or female counterpart gets disgusted with all this and wants to break away from this chain of repeated births and deaths. Before you get or jump into any conclusion, let me remind you that what happens to the gander happens to the goose also invariably. What is good for the goose is good for the gander too. Just like many male counterparts get attracted to the beauty, grace, finesse, and loveliness of the female counterparts, similarly, several women also get attracted towards the hard, muscular, attractive personality of male counterparts and thus get entrapped into a cycle of raising families. A renunciant, whether a male or a female, wants to shy away from this material entanglement of household affairs and fall in love with God to become His eternal servant, whereas the male counterparts invariably try to be servants of God. The female counterparts try to have a conjugal love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This depends on the taste, preferences, whims, fantasies, karma, and destiny of each individual living entity who was originally a spirit spark or a spirit soul. So now we will continue with the next stage in this process. Just like it took eons, decades, centuries, millenniums, and trilliums for one spirit spark to get ejected from the spirit's hole and ultimately become a human living entity. Similarly, it takes eons, decades, centuries, millenniums, and trilliums for the same living entity to get into the spiritual path, get attracted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, remember his or her original identity as a spiritual soul or a spiritual spark, get self realized, and start donning the real ego of being a spiritual soul, and then try to get liberated from this cycle of endless births and deaths in this material world. Only after that comes the stage where the same living entity turned self realized spirit soul and now liberated from this repeated birth and death cycle gets delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a completely finished, totally evolved spirit soul. However, for the time being, we are talking about the second stage of liberation. In this process, what happens is that any self realized soul which wants to get liberated tries to shy away from one birth or the other in some layer of the four layers of body that this material universe had enveloped it initially. In that process, the first to shake off permanently is this gross body. Here, let me point out towards a very big difference. Kindly remember that when a person, whether male or female, passes on in one particular lifetime to take another birth, that does not necessarily mean liberation. It is only a part of this endless cycle of repeated births and deaths. Liberation is when the same gross body which that living entity dropped on this terra firma gets detached to this other four layers of material body permanently. Not only that, the etheric body of senses, which was so connected to this gross body, which provided the sense organs of two eyes for sight, two ears for hearing, two nostrils for smell, one tongue for taste, and the skin and genitals for touch. This particular etheric body, which was connected to the gross body because of this facility, which facilitated an outlet of the etheric body of senses and its vibrations through this gross body, also dries away sooner or later when the gross body permanently detaches itself with the three layers of the material body. In other words, that living entity makes sure that he or she will never again be born in a material body, in a gross body. But this etheric body of senses, which with all its feelings of five senses, still remains without getting an outlet through the gross body. Hence, this etheric body, pained at first and trying to adjust later, slowly withers away permanently. But before you get or jump into any conclusion, let me remind you that there are two more layers of material body still entrapping that spirit soul. Just because this living entity has now stopped taking birth in the gross body and hence the etheric body of senses has slowly withered away. That does not mean that that living entity has again become a fully evolved spirit soul. No, it has still to complete its process as an astral being, an astral living entity, and later as a causal living entity before it gets permanently liberated from these two stages and thus realizes its true self as the spirit soul. Yes, this realization did happen to the same living entity even when it was still in the gross body. But now, with all the four layers drying up and withering away permanently from that spirit soul, this spirit soul alone remains as a fully evolved spirit soul. After this, the process of deliverance of that fully evolved spirit soul happens, and this deliverance is to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As I had mentioned earlier, just like the enveloping of the four layers of the spirit soul by the gross, by the material world, plus the initial ejection of the spirit spark floating around in the space endlessly, then getting attracted to the material world, thus becoming an unevolved spirit soul, and then getting entrapped into these four layers, took a very, very long time. Similarly, the opposite, that is, the shedding of all these layers, realizing the true self, then becoming a fully evolved spirit soul and getting delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead also takes eons, centuries, millenniums, and perhaps trilliums. In God's word, this is just a fraction of time. What looks Herculean for every spirit soul is actually not even nothing in God's word. This self realization, liberation, and deliverance has been happening to various spirit souls for times immemorial in this material and spiritual world. I already mentioned to you all that this huge infinite material world or seemingly infinite material world is just like a small basket hanging under the extraordinarily infinite spiritual world, which is far more powerful, evolved, and connected to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now we realize how this process happens from the spirit spark getting ejected out of the spirit soul in the beginning and finally getting delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a fully evolved spirit soul. This is one very interesting subject which we all can delve on and study, meditate, and contemplate on to understand what happens to us individual living entities and spirit souls in this world, both material and spiritual. In short, there is one spirit hole from which a spirit spark gets ejected, gets attracted to the material world, thus gets a new identity as a spirit soul, then gets evolved by four layers of material body, becomes a new entity as a living entity, goes through endless cycle of repeated births and deaths, then finally, after getting fed up of this cycle, tries to liberate itself slowly but steadily from these layers of material body, gets liberated as a fully evolved spirit soul, and finally gets delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the ultimate aim for every spirit soul, including us. We all should tread the path or walk on the path of spiritualism slowly and steadily, step by step, so that one day we may get self realized, liberated, and delivered as fully evolved spirit soars into the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the King of the spiritual kingdom. That is all I wanted to say in this particular video. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this particular matter. Please give me your own expert opinions, thoughts, and ideas so that I may blend everything together for the sake of this society. Before concluding, let me remind you that I am also a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.